There's a frame in the pilot episode of South Park, the very first episode, where if you look carefully at the bus stop scene, you can see something standing behind the trees. It's small. It's gray. It has big oval eyes. And if you blink, you'll miss it entirely. It's a visitor, an alien, tucked into the background, like it was always supposed to be there. Like the show was already hiding secrets before anyone even knew to look for them. I've been staring at South Park for a very long time now. And I mean really staring. Not just watching it, not just laughing at the jokes, and moving on to the next episode. I mean pausing frames, cross-referencing production dates, reading interviews from 20 years ago that nobody remembers, and going down rabbit holes that I'm not entirely sure have a bottom. And what I keep finding is this. South Park is a show that has been quietly hiding things in plain sight for almost 3 decades. Not just Easter eggs, not just background gags, but entire layers of production history, creative decisions, personal stories, and bizarre real-world consequences that most people have never heard about. And tonight, we're going to go through as many of them as I can possibly fit into this video. So if you're watching this late at night, get comfortable, grab a blanket, settle in, because we're going to be here for a while. And I think you're going to hear at least a few things tonight that genuinely surprise you. Even if you think you know everything about this show, especially if you think you know everything about this show. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. Just hit that button and stick around. We've got a lot of ground to cover. Let's start with that alien I just mentioned, because this is one of those facts that most South Park fans have heard some version of, but almost nobody knows the full story. The common version goes like this. There's a hidden alien in every single episode of South Park. It's the show's version of a Where's Waldo game. You just have to find it. And look, that's a great story. It's the kind of thing you tell someone at a party and they go, "Wait, really?" And then they spend the next 3 hours rewatching old episodes, trying to spot gray figures in the background. But here's the thing nobody talks about. It's not actually true. Not exactly. The alien visitors do appear in South Park. A lot. They show up hidden in crowd scenes, tucked behind buildings, standing among trees, drawn onto posters in the background, even flashing on screen for a single frame. The tradition started all the way back in the pilot episode, which aired on August 13th, 1997, and it continued heavily through the first several seasons. But the idea that there's one in every single episode, that's an urban legend. According to South Park Studios' own FAQ, the person responsible for hiding the aliens is Eric Stowe, the show's director of animation, and he puts them in at the last minute, if he remembers to, and he doesn't always remember. He doesn't even keep track of which episodes have them and which don't. So over half of the episodes have hidden visitors somewhere in the frame, but it's not a perfect streak. It never was. And I think that's actually more interesting than the legend, because it tells you something about how South Park gets made. This isn't a show where every detail is planned out months in advance and carefully placed by a team of 100 designers. This is a show where the animation director sometimes remembers to hide a gray alien in the background and sometimes forgets because they're scrambling to finish the episode before it airs in 6 days. And that chaos, that beautiful, frantic chaos, is what makes South Park what it is. Which brings me to the 6-day production cycle. And I know you've probably heard about this, but I want you to really sit with how insane it is, because I don't think most people fully grasp what it means. Most animated shows take months to produce a single episode. The Simpsons, for example, has a production pipeline that can take 6 to 9 months from script to screen. Family Guy operates on a similar timeline. Even smaller animated shows usually need weeks of work per episode. South Park does it in 6 days, sometimes less. They've done episodes in as few as 3 or 4 days when they're really under pressure. This was documented in the 2011 Comedy Central documentary called 6 Days to Air, The Making of South Park, directed by Arthur Bradford. The film follows Trey Parker and Matt Stone through the production of the season 15 premiere, Human Centipede. And honestly, watching that documentary is kind of stressful. You see Trey Parker sitting at his desk at 2 a.m, still rewriting the script while animators are already working on scenes from the first draft. You see the entire team operating on almost no sleep, running on caffeine and adrenaline, trying to get a finished 22-minute episode out the door before Thursday night. The documentary opens with Parker and Stone leaving New York City after the opening night of their Broadway musical, The Book of Mormon, and flying back to Los Angeles to start the new season of South Park. And I love that detail, because it really captures who these two are. They'd just premiered a Broadway musical that would go on to win 9 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, and their first thought was, okay, now we have to go make a cartoon about a kid who gets turned into a human iPad. But here's what a lot of people don't know about the 6-day cycle. It wasn't always like this. The original pilot episode, the one that aired on August 13th, 1997, took about 3 months to produce. 3 months. For one episode. And the reason it took so long is that the pilot was made almost entirely with actual construction paper. Real, physical paper. Cut by hand. Photographed frame by frame with an overhead camera. Trey Parker, Matt Stone, and their animation director Eric Stauch sat there with scissors and glue, cutting out hundreds of individual mouth shapes, character poses, and background elements, moving them a fraction of an inch between each photograph. That pilot, the one we don't name for obvious production reasons, but which introduced Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny dealing with an alien abduction, remains the only South Park episode animated largely without the use of computer technology. It was made on a budget of $300,000, and it almost didn't happen at all. I think about that sometimes. $300,000 and 3 months of cutting paper for an episode that was almost too crude for television. And now, the show has a production deal worth over $900 million with Paramount. That's not a typo. $935 million, signed in August 2021, extending the show through season 29, and including 14 original movies for Paramount+. When Matt Stone was asked about the deal, he said it gave them, and I'm paraphrasing here because his exact words are a bit too colorful, essentially complete financial freedom. I think you can guess what phrase he actually used. But let's go back to before any of that. Before the 9-figure deal. Before the Emmy Awards. Before the Peabody. Before the Broadway musical. Let's go back to 1992, to a film class at the University of Colorado, where two guys who had no idea what was coming next met each other and immediately bonded over Monty Python, and a shared love of pushing every possible boundary. Trey Parker and Matt Stone met in a film class in 1992. Parker had already been dabbling in filmmaking, and Stone was drawn to his energy immediately. That same year, they created the first version of what would eventually become South Park, a short film called The Spirit of Christmas, subtitled Jesus vs. Frosty. It was made with construction paper and filmed with an old 8mm camera. It premiered at a student film screening in December 1992, and it featured 4 kids who looked a lot like the characters we know now, though they weren't named the same way. There was a character who looked like Cartman, but was called Kenny, and a hooded boy who resembled Kenny but didn't have a name yet. And here's what kills me about that short. It was a student film. A thing Trey Parker made because he had a class assignment. And somehow, the DNA of a show that would run for nearly 30 years and generate billions of dollars was already there. The crude animation, the absurdist humor, the willingness to throw sacred cows into a blender. It was all there in a student film made with an 8mm camera and construction paper. 3 years later, in 1995, something happened that changed everything. A Fox broadcasting executive named Brian Graden, who was a friend of Parker and Stone, commissioned them to make a second short film. He wanted it as a video Christmas card. They made another Spirit of Christmas short, this time subtitled Jesus vs. Santa, and this one was much closer to the show we know. The town was explicitly named South Park. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny were all referred to by name, and the animation, while still crude, had the distinctive look that would define the series. Graydon sent the short out to friends. Those friends copied it. Their friends copied it. And in what might be one of the earliest examples of a viral video, years before YouTube even existed, The Spirit of Christmas spread across Hollywood like wildfire. People were passing around VHS tapes. One of those people was George Clooney. And this is where the story gets really fun. George Clooney loved The Spirit of Christmas. He loved it so much that he started attaching copies of it to his own Christmas cards and sending them out to everyone he knew. George Clooney was essentially the show's first marketing department. He was personally distributing bootleg copies of a construction paper cartoon about Jesus and Santa getting into a fistfight. And because he was George Clooney, suddenly every executive in Hollywood had seen it. This led to Comedy Central picking up the show. And when the pilot aired on August 13th, 1997, it was an immediate hit. The first season was a ratings phenomenon. Nielsen ratings for the show rose from a 1.3 for the first episode to a 6.4 by the 10th episode. To put that in perspective, the number of households that had Comedy Central jumped from 9.1 million in 1997 to 50 million by June of 1998. South Park didn't just succeed on Comedy Central. South Park basically built Comedy Central. Before the show debuted, the most Comedy Central had ever charged for a 30-second commercial was $7,500. Within a year, advertisers were paying $40,000 for 30 seconds during South Park. Some were paying $80,000. The show transformed a struggling cable network into a cultural force, and it did it with construction paper cutouts and more profanity than anyone on television had ever heard. And speaking of George Clooney, here's one of my favorite obscure facts about South Park, and it ties directly into the show's philosophy about celebrity. Clooney was so supportive of the show that Parker and Stone invited him to do a guest voice in season 1. He said yes, and they cast him as Sparky the dog in Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride, which was the 4th episode of season 1 and aired on September 3rd, 1997. His entire performance consisted of barking. That's it. George Clooney, one of the biggest movie stars on Earth, provided dog barks for a cartoon. And this wasn't an accident. Parker and Stone did this deliberately. They had a philosophy about celebrity guest voices that was the exact opposite of The Simpsons. On The Simpsons, guest stars would come in, play prominent roles, and their appearance would be a major marketing event. Parker and Stone thought that was boring. Their approach, as Parker explained in interviews, was, since South Park is sort of a show that rips on celebrity, we wanted to degrade them in other ways too. And we thought, let's have celebrities on, but have them do really minor, unimportant things. So they started a tradition of casting famous people in the most ridiculous roles possible. Jay Leno voiced Cartman's cat, Mr. Kitty, in the show's 3rd episode. His entire contribution was meowing. Jerry Seinfeld actually reached out to the show during its first season in 1997, wanting to be on it, and Parker and Stone offered him the role of Turkey Number 2. His dialogue would have been gobbling sounds. Just gobble, gobble. Seinfeld turned it down. And honestly, I kind of love that he turned it down, because it proves that Parker and Stone's celebrity trolling actually worked. They found the exact line where a famous person's ego wouldn't let them cross. But Robert Smith of The Cure? Robert Smith crossed that line and then some. In Mecha Streisand, which was season 1, episode 12, airing on February 18th, 1998, Robert Smith voiced himself as a giant moth-like monster who fights a Godzilla-sized Barbra Streisand. Parker was a massive fan of The Cure, and getting Robert Smith on the show was a lifelong dream for him. Smith recorded all his lines over the phone, and every single one was a first take. The episode ends with Smith walking off into the sunset, while Kyle shouts, "Disintegration is the best album ever," which, honestly, correct opinion. I actually have a theory about why these early celebrity choices tell you everything about what South Park would become. Most shows use celebrity cameos to add prestige. South Park used them to establish a pecking order. The show was always going to be bigger than any guest star, and making George Clooney bark and Jay Leno meow was a way of saying, we don't need you, but if you want to play in our sandbox, you play by our rules. That attitude defined the show's relationship with power and fame for the next 27 years. Okay, I want to talk about something that I think is genuinely one of the most underappreciated aspects of South Park: the voice acting. And specifically, how absurdly few people voice the entire show. Trey Parker voices Stan Marsh, Eric Cartman, Randy Marsh, Mr. Garrison, Timmy, Jimmy, Mr. Mackey, Butters Stotch, Mr. Hankey, Craig Tucker, Clyde Donovan, and dozens of other characters. Matt Stone voices Kyle Broflovsky, Kenny McCormick, Butters' dad, Steven Stotch, Jimbo Kern, Tweek, Craig's dad, Thomas Tucker, Pip, Terrence, and scores of others. Between the two of them, they voiced the vast majority of male characters on the show. And for female characters, for the first 3 seasons, nearly every single one was voiced by a single actress, Mary Kay Bergman. And this is one of those parts of South Park history that a lot of people don't know about, and it's genuinely sad. Bergman was the lead female voice actress on South Park from the show's debut in 1997. She voiced Leanne Cartman, Sheila Broflovsky, Sharon Marsh, Shelley Marsh, Carol McCormick, Wendy Testaberger, and essentially every other female character. She was also the voice of several Disney characters, including Snow White, and she was the one who sang the female vocals in Blame Canada for the South Park movie soundtrack. On November 11th, 1999, during the production of Season 3, Mary Kay Bergman died. She took her own life. She was 38 years old. The impact on the show was enormous. Parker and Stone later talked about how losing her made them realize that one person wasn't going to do it when it came to replacing her, because her talent was so vast. They eventually brought in Eliza J. Schneider and Mona Marshall to take over her characters, and later April Stewart joined as well. But for those first 3 seasons, every single female voice you heard on South Park was one person. And when you go back and listen to the range she had, from Sheila Broflovsky's aggressive New Jersey accent, to Sharon Marsh's patient Midwestern tone, to Wendy's earnest preteen voice, you realize how extraordinary she was. I think about her every time I hear Sheila Broflovsky yell, what, in an old episode. That voice was Mary Kay Bergman, and the show's history is a little bit different because of losing her. Here's a tangent, but I think it's an important one. I've been rewatching the early seasons of South Park a lot while putting this video together, and one thing that strikes me every single time is how different the animation looks, not just compared to the later seasons, which is obvious, but within the first season itself. The pilot looks different from the second episode. The second episode looks different from the 10th. You can actually watch the technology evolving in real time. After the pilot was made with real paper, the production team switched to computers almost immediately. During Weight Gain 4000 and Volcano, the animation was done using Power Animator software running on SGI workstations. The original paper cutouts were scanned and redrawn digitally using CorelDRAW, then imported into the animation software. It was a clever system. They kept the look of construction paper, but eliminated the nightmare of physically cutting and photographing every single frame. But even that system wasn't enough for what Parker and Stone wanted to do. When Season 5 was coming up in 2001, they made a major decision. They delayed the entire season by several months so the animation staff could learn Autodesk Maya, a much more powerful 3D animation program. This was a huge gamble. They essentially shut down production to retrain everyone on new software. But it worked. Maya is still what the show uses today, over 20 years later. And here's what's wild about the Maya transition. The whole point of using this incredibly sophisticated 3D animation software is to make the show look like it's still made of construction paper. They deliberately use Maya's tools to create flat, geometric shapes that mimic paper cutouts. The shadows, the movements, the way characters' limbs pop into different positions instead of smoothly transitioning, all of it is a deliberate artistic choice designed to preserve the crude aesthetic of the original paper animation. They're using a Ferrari to drive at the speed of a bicycle, and that's the entire point. The production team now consists of about 70 people, and they can typically complete an episode in 1 week. Some episodes are done in 3 to 4 days. Compare that to the 3 months it took to make the pilot. That's the kind of efficiency gain that would make any corporate productivity consultant weep with joy. Except instead of optimizing supply chains, they're optimizing how quickly they can animate Cartman getting into trouble. Speaking of Cartman getting into trouble, let's talk about Scott Tenorman Must Die, because I think this episode is the single most important turning point in South Park history, and a lot of people don't fully appreciate why. Scott Tenorman Must Die is the 4th episode of Season 5. It aired on July 11th, 2001, and when it first aired, people didn't know what to think. The setup seems like a typical Cartman scheme. A 9th grader named Scott Tenorman tricks Cartman into buying his body hair, and Cartman spends the episode trying increasingly ridiculous plans to get revenge. It feels like a regular episode, maybe even a slightly weird one, and then the ending happens. And I need you to think about what this show just pulled off, because it fundamentally changed how we understood Eric Cartman as a character. In the final act, Cartman reveals that he didn't just get revenge on Scott Tenorman. He engineered a scenario where Scott's parents were killed, their bodies were processed, and the meat was cooked into a chili that Scott then ate at a public event. And while Scott is realizing what he's just consumed, Cartman licks his tears off his face. And then, to add one final layer of cruelty, Radiohead shows up. The actual band Radiohead. They guest starred as themselves, and they mock Scott for crying. Look, I've watched a lot of television, a lot of comedy shows. And that reveal still hits different every time I see it. Because for 4.5 seasons, Cartman had been this bratty, racist, manipulative kid who was mostly just annoying and occasionally clever. After Scott Tenorman Must Die, he became something else entirely. He became genuinely dangerous. And the show never fully went back. The Radiohead cameo in that episode is its own story. The band actually recorded their lines, and Trey Parker has talked about how surprisingly easy it was to get them involved. They were apparently fans of the show and thought the whole concept was hilarious, which tells you something about Radiohead, honestly. Most bands would probably not be thrilled about appearing in a scene where a child feeds another child's parents to him, but Radiohead looked at that script and said, "Yeah, we're in." You know what's funny? I remember when this episode first aired and people online were debating whether it had gone too far. Whether Cartman's scheme was so dark that it crossed a line the show couldn't come back from. And here we are, 25 years later, and it's consistently voted as one of the best episodes of the entire series. I think there's a lesson in that about how South Park operates. The show is always going to be 3 steps ahead of where you think the line is. Let me tell you about one of the strangest April Fool's pranks in television history. It's April 1st, 1998. Season 1 of South Park has just ended with a massive cliffhanger. The season finale revealed that Cartman's father was one of several possible candidates, and fans were desperate to find out who it was. Comedy Central had been promoting the Season 2 premiere as the episode that would finally answer the question. And then on April 1st, instead of the Cartman's father reveal, South Park aired Terrence and Phillip in Not Without My Anus, a completely unrelated episode about the Canadian duo Terrence and Phillip. No resolution to the cliffhanger, no mention of Cartman's parentage, just half an hour of fart jokes. The backlash was immediate and enormous. Fans sent over 2,000 angry emails to Comedy Central within a week. Some outlets reported that viewers held a grudge against the show for more than 5 years afterward. Matt Stone's response was perfect. He basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, that if you get that upset because you don't know who a construction paper kid's father is, there might be something wrong with you. I love that story because it's pure Parker and Stone. They had the biggest audience they'd ever had. Everyone was tuned in for a specific resolution, and they looked at each other and said, "Let's show them a Terrence and Phillip episode instead." The episode is actually pretty good, by the way. But the point was never whether it was good. The point was that these two guys from Colorado would rather mess with their own audience than give them what they expected. And that willingness to blow up their own show for a joke is why South Park has survived for almost 30 years when most shows burn out in 5. Let's talk about the town itself for a minute, because this is something I find endlessly fascinating. South Park isn't just a funny name. It's a real place. Sort of. South Park is the name of a large grassland basin in Park County, Colorado. The largest town in the South Park area is Fairplay, Colorado, and Parker and Stone used it as the visual basis for the fictional town of South Park. But here's the detail that I think most people miss. The area was historically known for supernatural tall tales, UFO conspiracies, and alien abduction stories. Parker and Stone have talked about how these stories were part of their inspiration for the show. The alien visitors that pop up in episodes, they're not just random Easter eggs. They're a direct reference to the actual folklore of the real South Park region of Colorado. I spent way too long on Google Earth looking at Fairplay, Colorado, while putting this video together, and it really does look like the show. The wide open spaces, the mountains in the background, the small town feel. The town was established in 1859, and it was briefly renamed South Park City in 1869, before being changed back to Fairplay in 1874. So technically, there was a real town called South Park at one point in history. The show just brought the name back. Here's something that blows my mind when I think about it. South Park has been on the air long enough that it has gone through multiple, complete reinventions of itself. And each reinvention tells you something different about Trey Parker and Matt Stone as artists. In the early seasons, the show was primarily about shock value. It was crude, it was offensive, and it was funny in the way that a middle schooler finds things funny. I don't say that as a criticism. The show was genuinely revolutionary in how far it was willing to go. The pilot episode alone was enough to make people's jaws drop in 1997. but the humor was mostly surface level. "Can you believe they just showed that on television?" was the dominant reaction. Then, around season 4 and 5, something shifted. The show started getting smarter, not just raunchier, but genuinely more intelligent in its satire. Episodes started having actual arguments. Real-world events became the fuel for stories that weren't just, "look how offensive we can be," but "here's what we actually think about this issue, and we're going to make you think about it too." Scott Tenorman Must Die is part of this shift. So is the Scientology episode. So is the shift in Cartman from annoying brat to genuine sociopath. And then there's the Randy Marsh evolution, which is maybe the most significant character transformation in the show's history. In the early seasons, Randy was a background character, Stan's dad. He showed up occasionally, had a few lines, and disappeared. He was boring by design. But somewhere around season 9, Parker and Stone realized that Randy was the funniest character on the show. They started giving him more to do, then more, then more. By season 12, Randy had essentially become the main character of South Park. Parker has talked about this in interviews, saying that as he got older, he found it harder to relate to the kid characters and easier to write for the adults. And that makes sense, right? When you're 27 and creating the show, you write from the perspective of the kids. When you're 45, you write from the perspective of the dad who's making terrible decisions and embarrassing his family. Randy Marsh is Trey Parker's midlife crisis, animated with construction paper. I want to spend some time on the music, because I think South Park's musical accomplishments are genuinely underrated. And I don't just mean Blame Canada, I mean the whole catalog. Trey Parker is a genuinely talented musician and songwriter. Before South Park, he made a movie called Cannibal the Musical in 1993, which was a musical comedy about the real-life 19th century prospector Alfred Packer, who was accused of cannibalism. The film featured 10 original songs in the style of Oklahoma, and it started as a 3-minute trailer for a student film class, before being expanded into a full feature funded by $125,000 raised from family and friends. That film was eventually sold to Trauma Entertainment in 1996, and became their biggest selling title after Parker and Stone became famous. So Parker was writing musicals before he was making cartoons. And when it came time to make the South Park movie in 1999, he went all in on the musical format. South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, is, structurally, a Broadway musical. It has an opening number, reprises, villain songs, an I Want song, the whole works. And one of those songs, Blame Canada, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song at the 72nd Academy Awards in 2000. And here's where the story gets absolutely wild. Parker and Stone attended the ceremony, and they decided to make a statement. They showed up wearing dresses. Parker wore a version of the Versace dress that Jennifer Lopez had worn to the Grammys. Stone wore a pink gown inspired by the Ralph Lauren dress Gwyneth Paltrow had worn to the previous year's Oscars. And they were, by their own later admission, on acid. That's not a rumor. They've confirmed it in multiple interviews. A friend gave them sugar cubes with LSD before the ceremony, and they took them. They had a plan. If anyone asked about the dresses, they would simply say, "Well, it's just such a magical night." And that was it. That was the entire strategy for navigating the most prestigious ceremony in entertainment while wearing women's gowns and tripping. Robin Williams performed Blame Canada at the ceremony, which was its own complicated situation. The original singer of the female parts was Mary Kay Bergman, who had died just months earlier. The organizers had to find replacements for both her parts and Trey Parker's parts. Williams handled the performance with his usual genius, turning away from the camera at the exact moment where the word that the FCC prohibits in prime time would have been sung. They lost. Phil Collins won for You'll Be in My Heart from Tarzan, and in a move that surprises absolutely no one. South Park later mocked Phil Collins in the Season 4 episode, Timmy 2000, parodying his winning song as You'll Be in Me. I honestly think Parker and Stone believe they were blackballed from the Oscars after the dress stunt. They've joked about it in interviews. But the whole incident perfectly captures who they are. They got nominated for an Academy Award, the highest honor in entertainment, and their response was to show up in drag while hallucinating. That's not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. That's two guys who genuinely cannot help themselves. They see a prestigious moment, and their first instinct is, how can we turn this into the funniest possible story? The South Park movie itself holds a Guinness World Record, by the way. It was certified for most swearing in an animated movie. The final count: 399 profanities, including 139 uses of the F word, 128 offensive gestures, and 221 acts of violence. The number 399 wasn't random either. The MPAA had told them that 400 or more profanities would guarantee an NC-17 rating instead of the R they needed for theatrical release. So Parker and Stone counted every single swear word and stopped at 399. They weaponized profanity like a precision instrument. The MPAA battle over the movie rating is its own saga. The film was submitted for evaluation and received an NC-17 rating. They re-edited and submitted again. NC-17 again. They cut more. NC-17 again. They eventually had to ask the MPAA to tell them exactly what specific things needed to change. And after multiple rounds of cuts, they finally got their R rating. MPAA President Jack Valenti later said publicly that he regretted not giving the film an NC-17. Here's something I think about a lot. The song Chocolate Salty Balls, performed by Isaac Hayes as the character chef, reached number 1 on both the UK and Irish singles charts in December 1998. Let that sink in. A novelty song from an American cartoon show about a character making explicit chocolate treats went to number 1 in the United Kingdom. It debuted at number 2, behind the Spice Girls' Goodbye, missing the top spot by about 8,000 copies. Then the following week, it overtook the Spice Girls. It became the 7th best-selling single of 1998 in the UK, and it gave Isaac Hayes his first and only number 1 hit in Britain, bigger than Theme from Shaft had been in 1971. I keep coming back to how surreal that is. Isaac Hayes, soul legend, Oscar winner for the Shaft soundtrack, had his biggest UK hit with a song about chocolate treats from a cartoon show about foul-mouthed kids in Colorado. And by all accounts, he loved every second of it, which makes what happened later with Isaac Hayes even more painful. Because the Scientology episode changed everything. Trapped in the Closet aired on November 16, 2005, as the 12th episode of Season 9. In the episode, Stan takes a personality test at a Scientology center and is declared to be the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard. The central running gag involves Tom Cruise literally locking himself in Stan's closet, with everyone repeatedly saying, "Tom Cruise won't come out of the closet." The double meaning was about as subtle as a sledgehammer, which was entirely the point. The episode included an extended sequence explaining the actual beliefs of Scientology, with the story of Xenu and the body Thetans presented on screen, while a text banner read, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." It was devastating. Not because it made anything up, but because it presented the actual theology of Scientology in a straightforward way. And the theology itself was so bizarre that no additional mockery was necessary. Isaac Hayes was a Scientologist, and shortly after the episode aired, a statement was released in his name, saying he was leaving South Park because of the show's treatment of religion. But here's the part most people don't know. His son, Isaac Hayes III, later revealed that his father didn't actually quit. According to his son, Hayes had suffered a stroke and was not in a condition to make that decision. The statement was written and released by Scientology officials without his knowledge or consent. "My dad did not quit South Park," Isaac Hayes III has said. "Scientology did." Parker and Stone responded to Hayes' departure by killing off Chef in the Season 10 premiere, The Return of Chef, using archived audio clips of Hayes' voice spliced together in a deliberately obvious way. The character falls off a cliff, gets mauled, and is resurrected as a Darth Vader-like figure. It was their way of saying goodbye to both the character and the controversy. And it was exactly as graceful and subtle as you'd expect from the guys who showed up to the Oscars in dresses while tripping. The fallout from Trapped in the Closet didn't stop with Hayes. Reports emerged that Tom Cruise had allegedly threatened to back out of his promotional obligations for the Paramount film mission. Impossible 3 if Viacom allowed a repeat airing of the episode. Cruise's representatives denied this, but a scheduled rerun of the episode was pulled from the schedule. The episode's end credits were also unusual. Every single name was replaced with John Smith or Jane Smith. This was reportedly a legal precaution, since the production team was concerned about potential lawsuits from the Church of Scientology. I need to mention the Muhammad episodes, because they represent maybe the most serious moment in South Park's entire history. And I want to be careful and factual here, because this is a situation where real lives were threatened. Super Best Friends aired on July 4th, 2001, as the third episode of Season 5. It featured Muhammad as a member of a superhero group alongside Jesus, Buddha, and other religious figures. At the time, this barely registered as controversial. Muhammad had been depicted in Western media for centuries. The episode aired, people laughed, and everyone moved on. Then came 200 and 201, the 200th and 201st episodes of the series, which aired on April 14th and April 21st, 2010. These episodes revisited the question of depicting Muhammad, and in doing so, triggered one of the most alarming incidents in American television history. After 200 aired, a radical group called Revolution Muslim posted what amounted to death threats against Parker and Stone, suggesting they would face violent retaliation. When 201 aired, it was heavily censored. All images of Muhammad were blacked out. All mentions of his name were bleeped. Kyle's entire closing speech was bleeped as well, even though it reportedly didn't mention Muhammad at all. Comedy Central made the censorship decisions over the objections of Parker and Stone, who wanted the episodes to air unaltered. After the original broadcast, both episodes were pulled from reruns. They were removed from the South Park Studios website. When the series moved to streaming platforms, first Hulu, then HBO Max, then Paramount Plus, 200 and 201 were not included. The earlier Super Best Friends episode was also pulled retroactively, along with the two-part Cartoon Wars episodes from Season 10. All 5 episodes remain unavailable on any official streaming platform to this day. I think about the fact that there are 5 episodes of South Park that essentially don't exist anymore in any official capacity. You can't stream them. You can't buy them digitally. If you don't have the physical DVD releases, you can't watch them. For a show that has spent nearly 30 years insisting that nothing is off limits, that nothing is too sacred to be mocked, those missing episodes represent a strange and uncomfortable asterisk. Parker and Stone have spoken about the situation with a mixture of anger and resignation. They were, by all accounts, genuinely shaken by the death threats, not because they were afraid for themselves, but because of the implications for creative freedom. They'd built an entire show on the premise that everything could be satirized, and then they encountered the one thing that proved them wrong. Let's shift gears to something lighter. Let's talk about Butters. Butters Stotch is, and I will fight anyone on this, the best character in South Park. And the crazy thing is, he barely existed for the first 2 seasons. He was a background character, an unnamed kid who showed up in crowd scenes. The production crew had different nicknames for him, calling him Puff Puff and Swanson in internal scripts and storyboards. The character of Butters is based on Eric Stowe, the show's animation director, the same guy who hides the aliens in the backgrounds. Parker and Stone named the character after the nickname they'd been calling Stowe for years, Little Buddy, which evolved into Butters through the kind of linguistic drift that happens when you've been working with someone for years and making up nicknames. Butters' first significant appearance was in the Season 3 episode, 2 Guys Naked in a Hot Tub, which aired just 3 weeks after the South Park movie hit theaters. And after that, he just kept growing. More lines, more screen time, more storylines centered on him. By Season 6, when Kenny was temporarily killed off for the entire season, Butters stepped in as the 4th member of the group. And while Kenny eventually came back, Butters never went back to being a background character. Parker and Stone have said that Butters is one of their favorite characters, and that the scenes between Butters and Cartman are Parker's favorite moments in the entire series. And I get it. The dynamic between those two is perfect. Cartman is calculated cruelty in the body of a child. Butters is pure, guileless innocence. Every time they're in a scene together, you know Butters is going to get hurt, and you know it's going to be heartbreaking and hilarious in equal measure. Awesome O, which aired on April 14th, 2004, as the 5th episode of Season 8 might be the perfect Butters Cartman episode. Cartman disguises himself as a robot to trick Butters into revealing embarrassing secrets, but the plan backfires when Butters reveals he has an embarrassing video of Cartman, and Cartman has to maintain the robot disguise indefinitely. Watching Cartman slowly lose his mind while Butters innocently treats his robot friend with genuine affection is comedy at its purest. I want to talk about one of the most ambitious things South Park has ever done visually, because I think it shows how the show's crude animation style is actually a creative advantage, not a limitation. Good Times with Weapons, the Season 8 premiere, airing March 17th, 2004, is the anime episode. The boys buy martial arts weapons at a local market, and whenever they imagine themselves using the weapons, the animation style shifts from the standard South Park look to a full anime parody. The character designs become sharp and angular. The action sequences are fluid and dramatic. The backgrounds become painted landscapes. And the song, Let's Fighting Love, a pitch-perfect parody of anime opening themes that mixes deliberately broken English with Japanese lyrics, plays over the action. The thing that makes this work is that the contrast only exists because South Park normally looks so crude. If the show already had fluid animation and detailed character designs, the switch to anime style wouldn't land. But because South Park characters are essentially flat circles with stick arms, the transformation to anime warriors is hilarious. The crude baseline makes the departure meaningful. And that's a pattern you see throughout the show's history. South Park's limitations are actually its strengths. The simple animation means they can produce episodes faster than any other show. The small voice cast means Parker and Stone have total creative control. The crude aesthetic means that any departure from it, whether it's anime parody, Make Love, Not Warcraft, Style Machinima, or the Imagination Land trilogy's epic scope, hits harder because it's unexpected. Speaking of Make Love, Not Warcraft, let me tell you about the Blizzard collaboration, because it's one of those production stories that sounds made up, but is completely true. Make Love, Not Warcraft is the 8th episode of Season 10, and it aired on October 4th, 2006. It's the one where the boys have to defeat an impossibly powerful griefer in World of Warcraft by spending weeks grinding their characters into shape. The episode uses machinima, meaning actual in-game footage of World of Warcraft, for large portions of the episode. And here's what I love about this. Blizzard didn't just give them permission. They actively participated. Several Blizzard employees, led by cinematics artist Joey Ray Hall, temporarily relocated to the South Park studios in Los Angeles to help with the production. They recorded player movements, choreographed large-scale fight scenes, and gave the South Park team access to the alpha server of the World of Warcraft expansion, The Burning Crusade, which hadn't even been released yet. This was months before the expansion launched, and South Park had access to it. The episode won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program that year, and certain Season 10 DVD sets included a 14-day free trial for World of Warcraft. It's one of those rare moments where a show perfectly captured a cultural moment. If you were a gamer in 2006, this episode felt like it was written specifically for you, and the image of the boys getting progressively fatter and more unhealthy as they grind endlessly in the game is burned into the brains of an entire generation. I think this is a good moment to talk about the Emmys more broadly, because South Park's Emmy history is fascinating. The show has won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards, but the pattern of which episodes won tells you a lot about the show's evolution. The first Emmy was for Best Friends Forever, Season 9, Episode 4, which aired on March 30th, 2005. This is the Terry Scavo episode. Kenny gets a PSP, becomes the greatest player in the world, gets killed so he can command Heaven's army, and ends up in a persistent vegetative state, while Cartman campaigns to pull the plug so he can inherit the PSP. The episode aired mere hours before the real Terry Scavo died. That's the kind of timing that you can't plan. And it turned the episode from clever satire into something almost uncomfortably prescient. Best Friends Forever was significant because it was the first Emmy win for South Park, and it made the show the first cable TV series to win the Outstanding Animated Program category. Before South Park, only The Simpsons, King of the Hill, and Futurama had won it, and they were all network shows. South Park broke that barrier. Then came Make Love, Not Warcraft in 2006. Then the Imagination Land trilogy in 2008, which won in the 1 hour or more category. Then Margaritaville in 2009, the economic recession episode where Stan tries to return a Jimmy Buffett margarita maker while Kyle becomes a Jesus-like figure trying to save the economy by paying off everyone's debt with a credit card. And finally, Raising the Bar in 2012. Each winning episode represents a different facet of what South Park does well. A ripped from the headlines political satire, a perfect pop culture parody, an ambitious multi-part epic, a devastating economic commentary, and a media critique. The show hasn't won an Emmy since 2012, which either means the Academy has moved on or South Park has been too consistently good for any single episode to stand out. I choose to believe the latter. Let me tell you about the Peabody Award, because that one is maybe the most surprising honor South Park has received. In 2006, Comedy Central received a Peabody Award for South Park, citing the show's stringent social commentary and undeniably fearless lampooning of all that is self-important and hypocritical in American life. The Peabody is one of the most prestigious awards in broadcasting. It's given to shows that demonstrate excellence and public service. Previous winners include PBS documentaries, NPR news programs, and prestige dramas from HBO. And they gave one to a show where a character once mistook his own intestinal discharge for a religious miracle. I think about that contrast a lot. The same show that has a singing piece of excrement as a recurring character also won a Peabody for social commentary. And neither of those facts is wrong. Both are completely true about South Park. The show is simultaneously the most juvenile and the most incisive satire on television. And the fact that those two things can coexist in the same 22 minutes is what makes it special. Here's an obscure fact that I absolutely love. The episode Pip, which aired on November 29, 2000, as the 14th episode of Season 4, is a retelling of Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. Not a parody, not a reference, a full retelling. The entire episode takes place in Victorian England, uses the character Pip as its protagonist, and follows the basic plot of the novel. It's narrated by Malcolm McDowell in a live-action parody of Masterpiece Theater, doing an impression of Alistair Cook, who hosted the show from 1971 to 1992. And here's the really wild part. None of the main four characters appear in it. No Stan, no Kyle, no Cartman, no Kenny. It's one of only 2 episodes in the entire series where that's the case. Parker and Stone just woke up one day and decided to adapt a Charles Dickens novel for no apparent reason. That's the kind of creative decision that you can only make when you're producing episodes in 6 days, and you have complete creative freedom. Nobody at Comedy Central said, you can't do that. Or if they did, Parker and Stone didn't listen. I want to go deeper into the production process for a minute, because there are some details that I think most people would find genuinely shocking. When an episode of South Park is being made, Trey Parker typically doesn't finish writing the script until Tuesday or Wednesday. The episode airs on Wednesday night. That means the animation team is often starting work on scenes before the script is even complete. They're animating the beginning of the episode while Parker is still figuring out how it ends. The voice recording usually happens on Monday or Tuesday, and sometimes lines are re-recorded on Wednesday morning, the same day the episode airs. This is why South Park can respond to current events faster than any other show. When something happens in the news on Monday, Parker can write it into the script on Tuesday, record the lines that afternoon, animate it overnight, and have it on air Wednesday night. No other animated show can do that. No other animated show even comes close. The fastest turnaround in The Simpsons history was about 3 months. South Park does it in 3 days. But there's a cost to this approach, and Parker has been very honest about it. He's talked about how the last day of production is essentially a controlled panic. He doesn't sleep. He's making changes up until the episode is literally being uploaded for broadcast. He's described the process as being driven by fear, not inspiration. He's terrified that the episode isn't good enough, and that fear is what pushes him to keep rewriting and refining until the very last second. And you know what? I think that fear is actually what makes the show good. When you have 6 months to make an episode, you can second-guess yourself into mediocrity. You can smooth out all the rough edges until there's nothing interesting left. But when you have 6 days and the deadline is real and the episode is going to air whether it's ready or not, you're forced to trust your instincts. The urgency creates authenticity. The panic creates honesty. Let me talk about some facts that are genuinely strange. Things that exist in the South Park universe that most people have never heard of. Did you know that Kenny's muffled dialogue is actually real words? This is one of those things that seems obvious in retrospect, but a lot of people don't realize. When Kenny speaks, the words are genuinely there. Matt Stone, who voices Kenny, is actually saying full sentences through the parka. In the early seasons especially, if you listen very carefully, or better yet, if you watch with subtitles, you can catch what Kenny is saying, and it's often incredibly profane, much worse than anything the other characters are saying out loud. Parker and Stone have explained that Kenny's muffled voice is based on a real kid from Trey Parker's childhood. The real Kenny wore an orange parka that covered his face and muffled his voice. He was the poorest kid in the neighborhood, and he frequently missed school. When Kenny was absent, Parker and his friends would joke that he had died, and then he'd show up the next week. Perfectly fine. That's where the entire "they killed Kenny" running gag came from. A real kid in Colorado who kept missing school. The fact that Kenny dies in almost every episode of the first 5 seasons and nobody ever seems to remember is actually explained in the show's mythology. In the season 14 episode, Mysterion Rises, it's revealed that Kenny has the power of immortality. He dies, his mother gives birth to a new Kenny, he grows up overnight, and nobody remembers anything. The show went from a running gag about a kid dying to actually building lore around it. And the lore is that Kenny's immortality is connected to his parents being members of a Cthulhu cult, which is such a perfectly South Park explanation that I can't imagine it being anything else. By season 6, Parker and Stone had gotten tired of killing Kenny every episode. Stone has said that coming up with new ways to kill him was fun at first, but became increasingly difficult and tedious as the show went on. So they killed Kenny for real in the season 5 finale, and kept him dead for almost the entire 6th season. He was replaced by Butters initially, then by Tweak, neither of whom worked as a 4th member of the group. Kenny returned in the season 6 finale, Red Sleigh Down, and has been a permanent main character since, though his deaths became much less frequent. I want to circle back to something I mentioned earlier about the Man Bear Pig episodes, because this is one of my favorite examples of South Park doing something incredibly rare for a comedy show, admitting it was wrong. The original Man Bear Pig episode aired in season 10 in 2006. Al Gore visits South Park to warn about a creature called Man Bear Pig, which was very obviously a metaphor for climate change. The episode portrayed Gore as an attention-seeking fool and treated the threat of Man Bear Pig, and by extension, climate change, as imaginary. At the time, this was consistent with the show's libertarian-leaning stance of mocking everyone, but it also put them on the wrong side of the scientific consensus. 12 years later, in season 22, Parker and Stone did something that almost never happens in television. They made a 2-episode arc, Time to Get Cereal, and Nobody Got Cereal, in which Man Bear Pig returns and is very, very real. The creature starts destroying things, people die, and the boys have to go find Al Gore and apologize for not believing him. The episodes are essentially an acknowledgement from Parker and Stone that they got it wrong on climate change. Al Gore appeared on The Daily Show and praised the episodes, calling it a hell of a statement that the creators would acknowledge their mistake. And I think he was right. For a show built on never backing down, never apologizing, and never admitting weakness, those Man Bear Pig episodes represent a rare moment of genuine humility. Parker and Stone looked at their earlier work, recognized that the world had changed and the science was clear, and they updated their position. I wish more shows had that kind of intellectual honesty. Alright, let me hit you with some rapid-fire facts, because I've been going deep on individual stories, and I want to cover as much ground as possible. The character of Stan Marsh is based on Trey Parker. Kyle Broflovsky is based on Matt Stone. The town of South Park is based on the area around Fairplay, Colorado. The show's title is based on the actual geographic region called South Park in Park County, Colorado. Parker's full name is Randolph Severn Trey Parker III, which is where Randy Marsh's name comes from. Stan's last name, Marsh, is Parker's mother's maiden name. So Randy Marsh is essentially Trey Parker's dad, written through the lens of Parker's own aging process. That's why Randy gets funnier as the show goes on. He's getting closer and closer to who Trey Parker is becoming. Jennifer Aniston guest starred in the Season 3 premiere, Rainforest Schmainforest, which aired on April 7th, 1999. She voiced Miss Stevens, the choir teacher. Unlike most celebrity cameos on the show, Aniston actually got to play a real character with actual dialogue, which is practically red carpet treatment by South Park standards. The Woodland Critter Christmas episode, Season 8, Episode 14, airing December 15th, 2004, is considered by many to be the darkest episode of South Park ever produced. It starts with adorable woodland creatures in a Christmas story format, complete with rhyming narration, and then reveals that the creatures are Satanists performing blood rituals. The tonal shift from cute Christmas special to genuinely disturbing horror parody happens so smoothly that you don't even realize what's happening until you're already committed. Every single episode of South Park is written by Trey Parker. Every one. Matt Stone contributes ideas, feedback, and creative direction, and he voices half the cast. But Parker writes every script for over 27 seasons. That's over 320 episodes, all written primarily by one person. I honestly don't know how his brain hasn't caught fire. Speaking of writing, let's talk about the show's relationship with censorship, because it goes much deeper than most people realize. South Park has been in an ongoing battle with Comedy Central's Standards and Practices Department since day one. The network has a team of people whose job is to review episodes before they air and flag content that might be too extreme, and Parker and Stone have developed strategies for dealing with them that are genuinely clever. One tactic they've described is deliberate overshoot. They'll put something so extreme in the script that the standards team will focus all their energy on getting that removed, and while they're distracted, other questionable content slips through unchallenged. It's a magician's misdirection applied to broadcast standards. Put the really offensive joke in the A story, so the moderately offensive joke in the B story flies under the radar. They've also talked about how the standards team will sometimes give contradictory notes. One person will say, "You can show this, but not that." And another person will say, "You can show that, but not this." Parker and Stone will then play the notes against each other, arguing that the standards team itself can't agree on what's acceptable. So clearly the line is arbitrary, and they should be allowed to do whatever they want. There's a story about the movie that I think perfectly captures this dynamic. During the MPAA rating process for bigger, longer, and uncut, the board kept giving them an NC-17 rating. Parker and Stone kept making cuts and resubmitting. At one point, they submitted a version that was actually more extreme than the previous one, just to test whether the MPAA was actually reading the scripts or just counting swear words. The MPAA's notes were, apparently, less specific than you'd hope for an organization that's supposed to be the definitive arbiter of what's appropriate for audiences. Let me share something I noticed during my rewatch that I've never seen anyone else mention. In the early seasons of South Park, the background characters are basically identical. You'll see the same character model used for random townspeople, store clerks, and bystanders. But starting around Season 4, the backgrounds start getting more populated with distinct characters. Each one has a slightly different outfit, different hair, different features. And by the later seasons, the background crowds are full of unique character designs. This might seem like a minor animation detail, but I think it represents something bigger. As the show's production tools improved, and the team got more comfortable with Maya, they were able to put more care into the world building. The town of South Park went from a few streets and a handful of locations to a fully realized small town with its own geography, its own landmarks, and its own population of distinct residents. The show built its world gradually, over decades, one background character at a time. Here's another thing I noticed. The mountains in the background change slightly over the course of the series. In the early episodes, they're simple geometric shapes. By the later seasons, they're more detailed, with varying shades and textures. It's subtle enough that you'd never notice unless you were specifically looking for it, but it's there. The landscape of South Park has been slowly evolving for almost 30 years, just like the show itself. I want to talk about the Book of Mormon for a minute, because even though it's not technically South Park, it tells you everything about what Trey Parker and Matt Stone are capable of when they have unlimited time and resources. The Book of Mormon premiered on Broadway at the Eugene O'Neill Theater in March 2011, starring Andrew Rannells and Josh Gad. It was created by Parker and Stone, along with Robert Lopez, who had previously won a Tony for Avenue Q. The musical tells the story of two Mormon missionaries sent to Uganda, and it applies the exact same satirical lens to Mormonism that South Park applies to everything else. It's profane, it's offensive, it's hilarious, and underneath all the shock value, there's a genuine respect for the people it's satirizing, even as it demolishes their beliefs. The show won 9 of its 14 Tony Award nominations, including Best Musical. Parker personally won 4 Tonys in one night for producing, directing, writing the book, and writing the lyrics, tying the record set by Joshua Logan for South Pacific. The show also won a Grammy for Best Musical Theater Album. Here's what gets me about The Book of Mormon. Parker and Stone could have coasted on South Park for the rest of their careers. They were making millions. They had total creative freedom. They could have just kept making episodes and specials and movies. Instead, they spent years developing a Broadway musical from scratch. A completely different medium with completely different rules and expectations. And they didn't just succeed at it. They created one of the most successful musicals of the 21st century. I think The Book of Mormon is the strongest argument that Parker and Stone are not just TV writers who got lucky with a crude cartoon. They're genuine artists who happened to find their first medium in construction paper and profanity. The range from South Park to Broadway musical is enormous, and they navigate it without ever losing their voice. Let me shift to some more obscure production facts that I think deserve attention. South Park Studios, where the show is produced, is located in Culver City, California, not Colorado. The show that's set in Colorado and was created by Colorado natives is made in Los Angeles. Parker and Stone moved the production there because that's where the animation industry is based, and they needed access to talent and technology that wasn't available in Colorado. The studio operates like a startup during production weeks. The entire building essentially converts into a war room. There are writing rooms, recording studios, animation suites, and editing bays all running simultaneously. Food is catered constantly because people are working 18-hour days. And at the center of it all is Trey Parker, who functions as the creative bottleneck through which everything must pass. Every joke needs his approval. Every line reading needs his sign-off. Every animation decision gets reviewed by him. This centralization of creative control is both the show's greatest strength and its biggest vulnerability. The show is exactly one person's vision, which gives it a consistency and authenticity that no committee-produced show can match. But it also means that if Trey Parker is having a bad week, the episode suffers. There's no safety net, no secondary creative voice that can catch what he misses. Matt Stone, for his part, serves as the operational backbone. While Parker handles the creative side, Stone manages the business, the logistics, and the interpersonal dynamics of the production team. He's also a crucial sounding board for Parker's ideas. If Parker pitches a joke and Stone doesn't laugh, it gets cut. If Stone thinks an ending doesn't work, Parker rewrites it. Their creative partnership is less a collaboration of equals and more a symbiotic relationship where each person does what the other can't. I want to tell you about some episodes that tried things nobody expected and that I think deserve more recognition. A Million Little Fibers. Season 10, Episode 5, airing April 19th, 2006, is an episode entirely about Towley, the marijuana-smoking towel character. It's a parody of the James Frey memoir scandal, and it includes a B-plot where Oprah's intimate body parts gain sentience and hold the studio audience hostage. I mention this episode specifically because it's one of the weirdest things South Park has ever produced, and that's saying something for a show where a talking piece of fecal matter is a recurring character. Imagination Land was originally conceived as a theatrical film, not a TV episode. Parker and Stone planned to develop it as South Park's second movie. But because the plot involved appearances by dozens of copyrighted characters from other franchises, including Luke Skywalker, Gandalf, and various DC Comics superheroes, the legal complexities of a theatrical release were prohibitive. So they turned it into a 3-episode TV arc instead, which aired as episodes 10, 11, and 12 of Season 11 in October 2007. The trilogy was later released as a standalone home video titled Imagination Land the Movie, complete with previously unreleased footage. The Cartoon Wars two-parter from Season 10, Episodes 3 and 4, airing April 5th and 12th, 2006, is the Family Guy episode. And this one is interesting because it reveals exactly what Parker and Stone think about other animated shows. The episodes portray Family Guy's writers as a team of manatees randomly selecting beach balls to determine storylines and jokes. The implication is that Family Guy's humor is random and disconnected rather than driven by story or character. Seth MacFarlane, Family Guy's creator, has responded to the feud over the years with varying levels of warmth. He's praised South Park's longevity, saying, "Any show that lasts that long is pretty astounding," which is a diplomatic answer, I guess. But the manatee gag clearly stung, because it gets referenced in basically every discussion of the two shows, even 20 years later. Here's a fact that I think is genuinely surprising. South Park almost didn't happen because of Basketball. In 1998, a year after South Park premiered, Trey Parker and Matt Stone starred in Basketball, a comedy film directed by David Zucker of Airplane fame. The film was a critical and commercial failure, and it came at a time when South Park was already consuming most of their energy. Parker and Stone didn't write or direct Basketball, and the role Parker played was originally meant for Chris Farley, who died before production began. They've been somewhat dismissive of the film in interviews, and it represents a brief period where the South Park creators were exploring other opportunities in Hollywood before deciding to focus entirely on their show. Before Basketball, Parker had made Orgasmo in 1997, a comedy about a Mormon who becomes an adult film star. He wrote, directed, and starred in it. The film came out right around the same time South Park premiered on Comedy Central, and it gives you a sense of just how much Parker was producing in that period. He was simultaneously launching one of the most important shows in television history and making a low-budget comedy about the adult film industry. The man's work ethic is genuinely terrifying. And even before that, in 1993, Parker had made Cannibal the Musical, his first feature film, based on the real-life case of Alfred Packer. He raised the money from family and friends, wrote the script, wrote 10 original songs, directed the film, and starred in it. The production budget was around $125,000. After South Park became a hit, the film was picked up by Trauma Entertainment and became their best-selling title. The trajectory from Cannibal the Musical to a $900 million deal is probably the most improbable career arc in entertainment history. These are guys who made a student film about cannibalism for their college class and ended up with a Peabody Award and 9 Tony Awards. If you pitched that story as a movie, nobody would believe it. I want to spend some time on the South Park fandom, because the fan community has done some genuinely impressive detective work over the years that even the show's creators have acknowledged. Fans have compiled exhaustive databases of every hidden alien visitor in every episode, frame by frame. They've mapped the geography of the town based on clues in different episodes, and discovered that the show's internal geography is actually surprisingly consistent. The same buildings tend to be in the same places. The same streets connect to the same locations. For a show produced in 6 days, South Park has remarkably solid spatial continuity. Fans have also identified background gags and recurring visual jokes that span multiple seasons. There's a running visual element where you can spot a specific character or object appearing in the background of unrelated scenes, creating a kind of hidden continuity that rewards careful rewatching. Some of these were intentional. Some were probably accidental, and the fact that you can't always tell which is which makes it even more fun. The South Park Wiki, maintained by fans, is one of the most comprehensive television wikis on the internet. It documents every character, every location, every song, every continuity error, and every production detail with an obsessive thoroughness that I find genuinely impressive. When I was researching this video, I spent hours reading through wiki pages about individual background characters who appeared in maybe 3 episodes total, and there were detailed entries for all of them. Let me talk about Margaritaville for a moment, because I think it's the perfect example of South Park at its rhetorical best. Margaritaville is Season 13, Episode 3. It aired on March 25th, 2009, as an Easter special, right in the middle of the global financial crisis. The episode has two parallel storylines. In one, Randy Marsh becomes a prophet figure who convinces the town to stop spending money and live an ascetic lifestyle because the economy is angry and must be appeased. In the other, Stan tries to return a Jimmy Buffett Margaritaville margarita machine and ends up on an odyssey through the financial system that functions as an extended metaphor for the subprime mortgage crisis. Meanwhile, Kyle becomes a Christ-like figure who saves the economy by paying off everyone's debt with a credit card, which is essentially what the Federal Reserve did during the crisis, just with extra steps. The brilliance of this episode, and I don't use that word lightly, is that it recognized something that most mainstream commentary missed. The way Americans talked about the economy during the 2008 crisis was fundamentally religious. People spoke about the economy as though it were a living entity with feelings and desires. The economy needs confidence. We have to appease the markets. If we're not responsible, the economy will punish us. Parker and Stone saw that language and realized it was identical to how people talk about God. And they built an entire episode around that observation. Parker and Stone decided to submit Margaritaville for an Emmy because they'd received an unusual amount of positive feedback from older viewers and adults who normally didn't watch the show. They figured that since Emmy voters skew older, this was their best shot. They were right. It won. Here's a tangent that I think is worth mentioning. I've been making these videos for a while now, and every time I do a deep dive on a show, I end up discovering some detail that fundamentally changes how I see the whole thing. For this video, that detail was the production budget of the pilot, $300,000. That's what it cost to make the first episode of one of the most profitable franchises in television history. I keep thinking about what that number means. $300,000 is nothing in television. It's less than what some shows spend on catering for a single episode. And the episode it produced was so crude, so rough, so deliberately ugly that critics hated it, but it worked. It connected with audiences in a way that nothing else on television was doing in 1997. And I think the reason it worked is because the crudeness was the message. South Park looked like something you and your friends could make in your basement, and that was the point. It democratized animation. It said, you don't need Disney's budget or Pixar's technology to make something people want to watch. You just need something to say, and the willingness to say it. I've been talking for a while now, and I want to make sure I cover some of the more obscure facts that I promised in the title. So let me rapid fire through some things that I found during my research that genuinely surprised me. South Park has been translated into dozens of languages, and the translation process is a nightmare. The show relies heavily on wordplay, cultural references, and topical humor that doesn't translate well. The German dub is particularly interesting because German has strict broadcasting regulations about content aimed at minors, and South Park has had to be significantly modified for German audiences. The show's opening theme song has changed multiple times over the years. The original Season 1 theme featured the character of a man named Les Claypool, performing a banjo version of the South Park theme. Claypool is the bassist and singer of Primus, and he recorded the original theme song for the show. The theme has been remixed and re-recorded several times, with different arrangements for different seasons. Trey Parker has a degree in music from Berklee College of Music. Wait, no. Let me correct that. Parker studied music and Japanese at the University of Colorado. He does not have a degree from Berklee. The point stands that he has formal musical training, which explains why the show's songs are consistently so much better than they have any right to be. Kyle's Mom's a Big Fat, You Know the Rest, the song from Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, is a genuine musical number with complex harmonies and modulations. It's not just a funny lyric over a simple melody. It's a properly constructed song that happens to be about terrible things. Let me talk about something that connects to the broader animation industry. South Park's influence on how animated shows are produced. Before South Park, the conventional wisdom was that animated shows required long production pipelines. Multiple months per episode was standard. South Park proved that you could make a successful animated show on a weekly turnaround. And while no other show has fully replicated their model, the idea that animation could be responsive to current events was revolutionary. Other shows have tried to incorporate topical elements faster. The Simpsons has occasionally done rapid turnaround episodes or added last-minute references. Family Guy has done similar things, but none of them have achieved the level of real-time commentary that South Park manages week after week. When something happens on Monday, South Park can have a fully animated, scored, voiced episode about it airing on Wednesday. That capability is unique in television history. The 6-day model has also influenced how people think about creative deadlines more broadly. There's a concept in psychology called Parkinson's Law. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. South Park is the ultimate proof of this principle. Give a team 6 months, and the episode takes 6 months. Give them 6 days, and somehow the episode gets done in 6 days. And the quality doesn't necessarily suffer. Some of South Park's best episodes were produced under the most extreme time pressure. Parker has talked about how the pressure is actually essential to his creative process. Without a hard deadline, he second-guesses everything. He rewrites endlessly. He polishes jokes until they're not funny anymore. But with a real, immovable air date, he's forced to commit. He has to trust his instincts. And more often than not, his instincts are right. Let me share one more production story that I think encapsulates the South Park experience perfectly. During the production of the season 15 premiere, Human Centipede, which is the episode documented in 6 days to air, Parker had to fly from New York to Los Angeles to start work on the episode. He'd been in New York for the opening of The Book of Mormon, and the first night of that show was March 24th, 2011. The next morning, he was on a plane back to Los Angeles to start writing a South Park episode about Apple's terms of service agreements. Think about that timeline. Thursday night, he's at the opening of his Tony Award-winning Broadway musical. Friday morning, he's on a plane. By Monday, he's in a recording studio voicing Cartman. By Wednesday, a finished episode is airing on Comedy Central. The man went from Broadway opening night to recording studio in less than 72 hours. And the episode he made was about a kid who didn't read the terms and conditions before clicking agree and ended up being surgically attached to other people. It's based on the Human Centipede. It's grotesque, it's hilarious, and it was created in a state of what I can only describe as controlled artistic frenzy. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a video about facts and trivia. It's a video about what happens when two guys from Colorado decide to make art on their own terms and refuse to compromise for almost 30 years. The facts are the surface. The story underneath is about creative freedom, about the relationship between chaos and quality, about the strange alchemy that happens when you put incredibly talented people under impossible pressure and let them make whatever they want. Let me go back to the aliens for a moment. Remember the visitors I mentioned at the beginning? The gray figures hiding in the backgrounds? I've been thinking about what they represent. On the surface, they're an Easter egg, a fun detail for dedicated fans to hunt for. But on a deeper level, I think they're a symbol of what South Park has always been doing. The aliens are hidden. You have to look for them. You have to pay attention. You have to care enough to pause the frame and study the background. And South Park itself works the same way. On the surface, it's crude. It's offensive. It's a bunch of construction paper characters saying terrible things. But if you look carefully, if you really pay attention, there are layers hidden everywhere. Thematic complexity tucked behind fart jokes. Genuine emotional depth buried under profanity. Sophisticated musical compositions wrapped in juvenile humor. The aliens are South Park's way of telling you, look closer. There's always more than what you see on the surface. Let me talk about something that happened in Season 22 that I think represents a genuine evolution for the show, beyond just the Man-Bear-Pig apology. South Park has historically resisted serialization. For most of its run, each episode was self-contained. You could watch any episode without having seen any other episode. But starting around Season 18 in 2014, the show began experimenting with season-long arcs. Storylines would carry over from episode to episode. Characters' actions had consequences that persisted across multiple weeks. This was a controversial change among fans. Some loved the increased continuity and character development. Others felt it betrayed what made South Park special: the ability to tell any story, about any topic, at any time, without being constrained by ongoing plot lines. Parker himself has gone back and forth on the serialization experiment. Some seasons have been more serialized than others, and the show seems to be settling into a hybrid model where some elements carry over, while individual episodes still largely stand on their own. I think the serialization experiment tells you something important about Parker and Stone as artists. They're not content to keep making the same show forever. Even with a guaranteed deal worth nearly $1 billion, they're still pushing themselves to try new things. The 6-day production cycle could easily become a formula. Write the same kind of episode every week. Use the same structures. Hit the same beats. But Parker keeps looking for ways to challenge himself and the audience, even when the easiest path would be to coast. That restlessness is, I think, the fundamental engine of South Park's longevity. The show is 27 seasons old. Most shows don't make it to 10. And the reason South Park is still relevant, still talked about, still generating cultural impact after all this time, is that it refuses to settle into a comfortable routine. Every season brings something new. Every episode is a risk. And sometimes the risks don't pay off. But the willingness to take them is what keeps the show alive. But I'm not done yet. Not even close. Because there are so many more obscure facts about this show that I want to share with you. And some of them are genuinely among the strangest things I've ever learned about any television series. Let's talk about Casa Bonita. If you're a South Park fan, you know Casa Bonita as the Mexican restaurant from the Season 7 episode of the same name, where Cartman goes to extraordinary lengths to get invited to Kyle's birthday party so he can visit the restaurant. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Casa Bonita is a real place. Or rather, it was. Casa Bonita was a Mexican restaurant located in Lakewood, Colorado, just outside Denver. Built in 1974, it was spread across 52,000 square feet of indoor space and featured cliff divers jumping off massive indoor waterfalls, arcades, animatronic puppet shows, a Western outlaw floor show featuring a character named Black Bart, and a man in a gorilla suit who would greet patrons. The food, by most accounts, was terrible. But nobody went to Casa Bonita for the food. You went for the experience. Trey Parker grew up visiting Casa Bonita as a kid, and the restaurant held an enormous nostalgic significance for him. When the COVID-19 pandemic sent Casa Bonita's owners into bankruptcy in 2021, Parker and Stone saw an opportunity. On September 23, 2021, they finalized a $3.1 million acquisition of the restaurant. And then they did something nobody expected. They didn't just buy Casa Bonita to save it. They poured over $40 million into renovating it. $40 million. For a Mexican restaurant in a strip mall in Lakewood, Colorado. They brought in award-winning chef Dana Rodriguez to redesign the entire menu. They restored the cliff diving, the arcades, the waterfalls, and all the beloved attractions. The stated goal was to improve everything, but change nothing. Casa Bonita reopened to the public on October 1st, 2023, and the whole saga was documented in a film that covers the renovation process. The story of two guys who loved a restaurant so much as kids that they spent $40 million of their adult money saving it is one of those facts that transcends South Park fandom. It's just a good story about people caring deeply about something and having the resources to preserve it. I think about Casa Bonita when people say South Park is nihilistic, when people say the show doesn't believe in anything. Here are two guys who built their careers on tearing things down, on mocking institutions, on refusing to be sentimental about anything. And then they spent $40 million restoring a childhood restaurant because it meant something to them. That's not nihilism. That's love, expressed in the most Trey Parker and Matt Stone way possible. Now let me tell you about something that happened in Season 12 that involves real guinea pigs, actual physical guinea pigs, being dressed in tiny costumes. Because this is one of those production stories that sounds too absurd to be true. The Pandemic Two-Parter, episodes 10 and 11 of Season 12, airing October 22nd and 29th, 2008, features giant guinea pigs attacking a city in a parody of the film Cloverfield. Part of the episode includes found footage-style camera work, with Randy Marsh filming everything on his camcorder. But the giant guinea pig scenes were shot using real, live guinea pigs wearing tiny costumes, photographed against miniature sets. According to the creators, this turned out to be far more difficult than anyone anticipated. The guinea pigs refused to move when put into the costumes. They would just sit there. The production team spent hours filming, trying to get even a single usable shot of a guinea pig in a tiny pirate hat walking across a miniature city street. Hours of guinea pig wrangling for a joke that lasts maybe 30 seconds on screen. I absolutely love that detail. This show, which prides itself on its speed and efficiency, spent more time on guinea pig costuming than on most of its script rewrites. Somewhere in a production facility in Los Angeles, a team of professional animators and filmmakers sat around a table with tiny guinea pig costumes and waited, patiently, for a rodent to take a single step forward. And then they edited that footage into an episode that also contains commentary on border policy and Peruvian flute bans. Let me talk about the theme song for a minute, because its origin story is one of those facts that perfectly captures how South Park came together. The South Park theme was composed and performed by Primus, specifically by Les Claypool, the band's legendary bassist and vocalist. Parker and Stone approached Primus to compose the song, and their initial offer was reportedly $74 and a copy of The Spirit of Christmas short film. $74 for what would become one of the most recognizable TV themes of the late 20th century. Claypool agreed, because apparently that's the kind of thing Les Claypool does. The original recording was about 40 seconds long, which Comedy Central rejected as too slow. So Claypool re-recorded his vocals during a Primus concert tour at the Fiddler's Green Amphitheater, and the theme was compressed using Pro Tools to fit the required time. The result is that slightly manic, sped-up quality that the theme has always had. It sounds urgent and slightly unhinged, which, now that I think about it, is a perfect description of the show itself. The theme has been remixed and re-recorded several times over the show's run, with different arrangements for different seasons. But the core melody, Claypool's bass line, and the overall energy have remained consistent for almost 30 years. It's one of those TV themes that you can recognize from the first 3 notes, and every version of it carries the same sense of chaotic, gleeful irreverence. Here's another fact I want to explore, and this one speaks to how South Park interacts with its own fan base in ways that are genuinely unique. In Season 19, Episode 6, Tweak X Craig, which aired on October 28, 2015, the show tackled the phenomenon of yaoi, a genre of Japanese art and fiction that depicts romantic relationships between male characters, often characters from existing media. In the episode, the town becomes convinced that Tweak and Craig are in a romantic relationship after Japanese exchange students create yaoi-style fan art of the 2 characters. But here's the obscure part. Before the episode aired, the South Park production team put out an open call for fans to submit their own yaoi-style art of Tweak and Craig. The actual fan art would be used in the episode itself. Over 1,500 pieces of fan-created art were submitted, processed by the administrators at South Park Studios, and incorporated directly into the finished episode. So when you watch Tweak X Craig, and you see the yaoi drawings that appear throughout the episode, those are real drawings made by real South Park fans. That's a level of audience interaction that most shows wouldn't even consider. South Park literally incorporated its own fan community's art into a canonical episode, and the fan art was used as a plot device within the story. The line between the show and its audience became genuinely blurry in that episode, and I think it represents a kind of creative openness that you rarely see in network television. What makes this even more interesting is that the episode ended up being one of the most progressive things South Park has ever done. Despite starting from a place of gentle mockery about the yaoi phenomenon, the episode ultimately treats Tweak and Craig's relationship as genuine and valid. The 2 characters have remained an official couple in subsequent episodes. An episode that began as a joke about fan art ended up creating a canonical same-sex relationship that the show has treated with consistent respect ever since. I keep finding layers to this show. Every time I think I've gone deep enough, there's something else underneath. Let me tell you about Season 20, because it's a fascinating case study in what happens when South Park's real-time production model collides with genuinely unpredictable reality. Season 20 premiered on September 14th, 2016, with the episode Member Berries. The season was built around a serialized narrative arc about the presidential election, with Mr. Garrison serving as the Trump stand-in. The Member Berries were grape-like fruits that induced waves of nostalgia by reminiscing about the past, an obvious satire of the nostalgic political rhetoric that dominated the 2016 campaign. Here's the thing nobody expected. Parker and Stone had planned the season around the assumption that Hillary Clinton would win the election. The entire arc was structured to build toward that outcome. And then, on November 8th, 2016, Trump won. And suddenly, the season's entire narrative foundation collapsed. The post-election episode, Oh Geez, had to be completely rewritten overnight. The original version had been prepared for a Clinton victory, and when the results came in, Parker and Stone were left scrambling to produce an episode that acknowledged the actual outcome. The resulting episode has a dazed, shell-shocked quality to it that wasn't entirely a creative choice. It reflected the genuine disorientation of a production team that had built an entire story arc around one outcome and gotten another. I think Season 20 is the most honest South Park has ever been about its own limitations. The show's ability to respond to current events in real time is usually its greatest strength. But when reality becomes more unpredictable than satire, even South Park struggles to keep up. The Member Berries arc started brilliantly and ended messily. And that messiness is itself a kind of document of what November 2016 felt like for a lot of people. Parker later admitted that the serialization experiment of seasons 19 and 20 had been partly a mistake. He felt that trying to maintain ongoing storylines limited the show's ability to do what it does best: respond to the moment. Subsequent seasons pulled back from heavy serialization, returning to a more episodic format with lighter continuity threads. The show learned from its own experiments and adjusted, which is exactly what you'd expect from creators who have been iterating on their process for nearly 3 decades. There's a detail about the voice recording process that I want to share, because it's one of those things that completely changes how you hear the show. Trey Parker records most of his character voices in a single session. He'll sit in the recording booth and run through all of Cartman's lines, then do all of Stan's lines, then Randy's, then Mr. Garrison's, switching between characters with barely a pause. The speed at which he can shift between these voices is genuinely astonishing when you think about the range involved. Cartman's high-pitched, nasal whine is nothing like Randy's excitable, middle-aged dad voice, which is nothing like Mr. Garrison's southern drawl. And Parker does all of them. But here's the part that I find most interesting. Cartman's voice is essentially Trey Parker's regular voice, pitched up slightly and given a lisp. If you slow down recordings of Cartman's dialogue, you can hear Parker's natural voice underneath. The character that became one of the most recognizable voices in all of television is basically just Trey Parker talking with a slightly different inflection. It's not a character voice in the traditional sense. It's Parker's own voice, with the dial turned about 15% to the left. Matt Stone has talked about how the voice recording sessions are one of the most exhausting parts of the production process. Even though they only take a few hours, the energy required to perform dozens of distinct characters in rapid succession is draining. And the recordings often happen on Monday or Tuesday, which means the voice work is being done before the script is even finished. Parker will sometimes record placeholder lines with the understanding that they'll be re-recorded later in the week when he knows how the episode actually ends. There's something almost jazz-like about that approach. Improvising the performance before the composition is complete. Laying down tracks before the song is written. It shouldn't work, but it does. Because Parker's instincts for these characters are so deeply internalized after 27 seasons that he can perform them almost on autopilot, freeing up his conscious mind to focus on the writing. I want to cover a few more obscure facts that I think deserve attention before I start bringing this all together. There's a visual detail that longtime fans have noticed, but that rarely gets discussed. In the early seasons, whenever a character dies, the animation is deliberately more graphic and detailed than the rest of the show. Kenny's deaths, in particular, are drawn with more care and specificity than almost anything else in the episode. The blood splatters, the body positioning, the destruction of the character model. For a show where most characters are simple geometric shapes, the deaths receive an almost loving attention to anatomical detail. I think that contrast is intentional. By making the deaths visually elaborate in a show where everything else is deliberately crude, Parker and Stone draw your attention to the violence. It's not background noise. It's not something you can ignore. The show forces you to look at the death, to register it, even as the characters around Kenny immediately move on and forget it happened. And speaking of things characters forget, there's a running background gag across the first 5 seasons, where Kenny is the only character who acknowledges that unusual things keep happening in South Park. In the early episodes, Kenny will sometimes react to the bizarre events around him with alarm, while the other characters treat them as normal. It's subtle, and it gets lost behind the louder comedy. But there's a thread of Kenny being the most self-aware character in the show, the one who recognizes that something is deeply wrong with this town, but who can never communicate his concerns, because nobody can understand what he's saying through his parka. Think about that for a second. The character who knows the most about what's happening is the one who can't be heard. That's not just a running gag. That's a genuine piece of storytelling craft, hiding in a show about kids who say terrible things. Let me touch on a few more rapid-fire facts, because I promised you obscure details, and I want to deliver. South Park has been referenced in congressional hearings. When the show depicted the Prophet Muhammad in Super Best Friends in 2001, and later in episodes 200 and 201 in 2010, the controversy surrounding those episodes was discussed in actual congressional proceedings about free speech and religious sensitivity. The show once crashed Comedy Central's website. When South Park Studios began streaming full episodes online for free in 2008, the traffic was so enormous that the servers couldn't handle the load. The site was one of the first major television properties to offer full episodes for free streaming, which was a radical idea at the time and helped pave the way for the streaming model that would come to dominate the industry. Matt Stone was born in Houston, Texas, not Colorado. Despite being so closely associated with Colorado that most people assume he's a native, Stone was actually born in Houston on May 26, 1971. His family moved to Littleton, Colorado, when he was a child, which is where he grew up and eventually met Trey Parker at the University of Colorado. Trey Parker's full name is Randolph Severn Parker III. He goes by Trey because it's a nickname for the Third. His father's name is Randy Parker, which is where the character Randy Marsh gets his first name. South Park Elementary, the fictional school in the show, has been destroyed multiple times over the course of the series, and always reappears the following episode without explanation. This deliberate lack of continuity in the early seasons was part of the show's anti-sitcom ethos. Nothing had permanent consequences. Nothing changed. The status quo reset every week. It wasn't until later seasons that the show began allowing events to have lasting effects. The catchphrase, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," followed by "You bastards," was performed by Matt Stone as Kyle in the early seasons. But as the show progressed, and Kenny's deaths became less frequent, the catchphrase was gradually phased out. When it does appear in later episodes, it carries a sense of nostalgic callback rather than genuine surprise. I mentioned earlier that the show's animation is done in Maya, but designed to look like paper cutouts. Here's a specific detail that illustrates this. When characters walk in South Park, their legs don't move naturally. They waddle. The feet sort of shuffle from side to side in a way that mimics how construction paper legs would look if you were moving them by hand under a camera. This walk cycle has remained consistent throughout the entire series, even as the animation technology has improved dramatically. It's a deliberate choice to preserve the original aesthetic, and it's become so iconic that you can identify South Park characters just by how they walk, without seeing their faces. There's another animation detail that I want to highlight. The way characters turn around in South Park is different from virtually every other animated show. Instead of rotating naturally, characters facing left will cut directly to facing right, with a completely different character model used for each direction. This is because the original paper cutouts had separate front, back, and side views that were swapped out rather than animated through a rotation. The digital version maintains this convention even though Maya could easily animate smooth turns. These animation quirks are so deeply embedded in South Park's identity that when the show occasionally does break them, like in the anime sequences of Good Times with Weapons, the contrast is jarring enough to be funny on its own. The show has turned its technical limitations into artistic signatures, which is something I find endlessly fascinating about how creativity works. One thing I want to mention before I wrap up this section is the South Park video games. South Park: The Stick of Truth, released in 2014 and developed by Obsidian Entertainment, was significant because Parker and Stone were deeply involved in the writing and creative direction. The game looks and plays like an interactive episode of South Park, and the animation is so faithful to the show that screenshots from the game are virtually indistinguishable from screenshots of the actual series. The game was in development for years and went through multiple publishers before finally being released by Ubisoft. There were concerns that translating South Park's crude animation style to a video game would look cheap, but the opposite happened. The game's visual fidelity to the show was praised as one of its greatest strengths. It proved that South Park's low-quality aesthetic was actually a sophisticated design choice that could translate across media. Its sequel, South Park: The Fractured But Whole, released in 2017, continued this approach, with Parker and Stone again providing extensive creative input. The games have sold millions of copies and represent another revenue stream for the South Park franchise, further cementing the show's position as one of the most commercially successful animated properties in history. I also want to mention something about the show's impact on the English language. South Park has introduced numerous phrases and neologisms into common usage. Derp, the expression of foolishness, was popularized by the show. Mumkay, Mr. Mackey's verbal tick, became a widely recognized cultural reference. Respect my authorita entered the lexicon of quotable television lines. Man bear pig became shorthand in political discourse for dismissing perceived threats. The Oxford English Dictionary has even cited South Park in relation to certain terms entering the language. When a cartoon show is influencing dictionaries, it has transcended entertainment and become a genuine cultural force. And I think that's one of the most underappreciated aspects of South Park's legacy. It didn't just entertain people. It gave them new ways to talk about the world. Speaking of language, I want to go a little deeper on something that I think most casual viewers have never really considered: the show's approach to musical composition. I touched on this earlier with Blame Canada and the movie, but the musical DNA of South Park goes so much deeper than a single Oscar-nominated song. Trey Parker didn't just write songs for the movie. He writes songs for the show constantly. Kyle's Mom is a fully orchestrated musical number. La Resistance is a legitimate Act 2 opener worthy of a Broadway production. Montage from Season 6 is a meta-commentary on the use of montages in film, presented as a song, that's simultaneously a perfect example of the thing it's parodying. And Let's Fighting Love from the anime episode is a pitch-perfect parody of Japanese anime opening themes, complete with deliberately incorrect English lyrics mixed with actual Japanese. What kills me about all of these songs is how good they are as actual music. Strip away the comedy and the context, and many of South Park's songs are genuinely well-crafted compositions with complex chord progressions, interesting harmonic choices, and professional quality orchestration. Parker didn't learn this by accident. He studied music formally, and you can hear that training in every song the show produces. I actually think Parker might be underrated as a songwriter. I know that sounds strange given his success, but hear me out. People appreciate his songs as comedy. They laugh at the lyrics. They enjoy the parody. But I don't think most people recognize the musical sophistication underneath the humor. Blame Canada isn't just funny. It's a structurally perfect protest song that builds through multiple key changes to an emotionally resonant climax. Up There, Satan's Ballad from the movie, is a genuine I Want song in the Disney tradition that's just as emotionally effective as Part of Your World or Somewhere Out There. The comedy doesn't undermine the craft. It conceals it. And then there's The Book of Mormon, which proved beyond any doubt that Parker's musical abilities are world-class. You don't win 9 Tony Awards with novelty songs. The score of The Book of Mormon is a Broadway score in every sense. It has to function dramatically, emotionally, and musically. And it does all three while also being consistently hilarious. The fact that the same person wrote Uncle Fucker and I Believe is one of those facts that I think future music historians will find genuinely fascinating. Here's a tangent that I've been wanting to share. During my research for this video, I came across the story of how the Book of Mormon almost didn't happen. Parker, Stone, and Robert Lopez spent about 7 years developing the musical before it premiered in 2011. 7 years. These are guys who make South Park episodes in 6 days, and they spent 7 years on a Broadway show. The contrast tells you everything about how seriously they took the project. Lopez brought the technical Broadway expertise. He'd already won a Tony for Avenue Q, and understood the mechanics of musical theater in a way that Parker and Stone, for all their talent, didn't. The collaboration was essential. Parker and Stone brought the comedic voice and the willingness to push boundaries. Lopez brought the structural knowledge of how a Broadway show needs to work. Together, they created something that none of them could have made alone. I mention this because I think it reveals something important about Parker and Stone that gets lost in the two guys from Colorado narrative. Yes, they're irreverent. Yes, they're crude. Yes, they built an empire on construction paper and profanity. But they're also incredibly deliberate about their craft. They don't just wing it. They study the forms they're working in. They understand the conventions. And then they subvert those conventions from a position of genuine knowledge. South Park looks like it was made by amateurs. It wasn't. It was made by people who understand animation, music, storytelling, and comedy at a level that most professionals never reach. The crudeness is a choice, not a limitation. And that distinction is the key to understanding everything the show has accomplished. Let me share a few more facts that I discovered during my research that I think deserve a home in this video. There's a deleted scene from the South Park pilot that has circulated among hardcore fans for years. In it, the characters have slightly different dialogue, and some of the joke timing is different from the version that aired. The pilot went through several revisions before its final form, and each version reveals subtle shifts in how Parker and Stone were calibrating the show's tone and humor. It's a reminder that even something that feels as spontaneous as South Park went through an editorial process. South Park has been the subject of academic study at multiple universities. Courses on media studies, cultural criticism, and political satire have used episodes as primary texts. There are published academic papers re-arising the show's treatment of religion, politics, race, and popular culture. A show that regularly features talking pieces of fecal matter has been assigned as reading at institutions of higher learning. I find that endlessly delightful. The show's treatment of disability and special needs characters has been, oddly enough, one of its more progressive elements. Timmy and Jimmy, introduced in seasons 4 and 5 respectively, are disabled characters who are treated as full members of the cast with their own storylines, motivations, and agency. They're not objects of pity or inspiration. They're just kids in South Park, dealing with the same absurd situations as everyone else. In a show that's frequently accused of being offensive about everything, its treatment of disabled characters has been surprisingly ahead of its time. Mr. Hanky, the talking piece of fecal matter who appears every Christmas, was based on a story Trey Parker's father told him as a child to encourage him to flush the toilet. His father would tell young Trey that if he didn't flush, Mr. Hanky would come out of the toilet and get him. Parker took this childhood terror and turned it into one of the show's most beloved recurring characters. Parenting lessons, apparently, have unpredictable long-term consequences. I want to talk about one more set of obscure facts before I start wrapping up, because these are details that I think really capture the weird, specific reality of how South Park exists in the world. There are multiple real-world buildings, restaurants, and businesses that have been referenced in South Park and then experienced real-world consequences. The Scientology episode led to actual organizational responses from the Church of Scientology. The Tom Cruise closet joke became part of the cultural shorthand around discussions of Cruise's personal life. The Man Bear Pig episode influenced how climate change skeptics used pop culture references in political debates. The town of Fairplay, Colorado, which inspired the show's setting, has leaned into its connection to South Park. While the relationship hasn't always been comfortable, there's a tourist component to the area that's directly tied to the show's fame. People visit Fairplay because of South Park. They take photos with mountain backdrops that look like the show's opening credits. The fictional town created a real-world tourism economy for the actual place it was based on. And the Paramount deal. Let me put the $935 million deal in perspective. That deal was announced in August 2021, and it extended the show through season 29 and included 14 original movies for Paramount Plus. More recently, there have been reports suggesting the total deal value may have reached as high as $1.5 billion with subsequent negotiations and extensions. For context, this makes Trey Parker and Matt Stone two of the highest compensated content creators in entertainment history for a show made with digital construction paper. But the deal also represents something else. It represents a bet by Paramount that South Park will remain culturally relevant for at least another half-decade. And if you look at the show's track record, that bet seems safe. South Park has survived the transition from broadcast to cable, from cable to streaming, from VHS to DVD to digital. It survived the internet revolution, the social media era, cancel culture, and the fragmentation of the media landscape. It survived because it was always able to adapt faster than the environment around it. 6 days. That's all it takes to respond to whatever the world throws at it. The Paramount Plus specials themselves have been an interesting experiment. Starting in 2021, Parker and Stone began producing long-form South Park movies exclusively for the streaming platform. These specials are typically around an hour long, giving them more room to develop storylines than a standard 22-minute episode allows. The first two specials, Post-COVID and Post-COVID, The Return of COVID, aired in November and December 2021 and depicted the South Park characters as adults in a post-pandemic future. It's a format that suits the show's evolution. As Parker and Stone have gotten older, they've gravitated toward longer, more developed storytelling. The Paramount Plus specials give them the space to do that while still maintaining the speed and topicality that define South Park's production model. Whether they'll continue producing these alongside regular seasons, or whether the specials will eventually replace the traditional format entirely, remains to be seen. But the fact that the show is still experimenting with its own structure after nearly 30 years tells you everything about the creative restlessness that drives it. Let me tell you one more thing about the broader cultural impact of South Park, because I think it gets underestimated. South Park didn't just influence animation or comedy. It influenced how an entire generation thinks about cultural commentary. Before South Park, the default mode of political satire was either gentle mockery from the center, like late-night talk shows, or pointed criticism from the left, like political cartoons. South Park introduced something different, satire that attacked everyone from every direction simultaneously. The show's stance of "we hate conservatives and liberals" was genuinely novel in the late 90s. It created space for a kind of cultural commentary that wasn't aligned with any political tribe, that refused to let anyone off the hook. You can argue about whether this approach is effective or nihilistic, and people have argued about it for 27 years. But you can't deny that it changed the landscape. Shows like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, podcasts like South Park, inspired commentary channels on YouTube, and the entire aesthetic of internet humor owes something to the model that South Park established. The show also demonstrated that animation could be a vehicle for serious adult storytelling, not just a format for kids' shows and sitcoms. Before South Park and The Simpsons, animated shows aimed at adults were a novelty. After South Park proved that you could tell complex, topical, sometimes devastating stories through construction paper cutouts, the doors opened for Archer, BoJack Horseman, Rick and Morty, and dozens of other adult animated series that use the freedom of animation to tell stories that live action can't. I'm not saying South Park invented adult animation. The Simpsons got there first. But South Park proved that adult animation could be political, provocative, and structurally ambitious in ways that The Simpsons, with its more conventional sitcom framework, hadn't fully explored. South Park showed that the medium had no ceiling, and that lesson has shaped everything that came after. Here's something I want to mention that ties together several threads we've been exploring tonight. South Park's relationship with its own legacy is one of the most complicated things about the show. On one hand, it's a show that lives entirely in the present. The 6-day production cycle means it's always responding to this week's events. On the other hand, it's been doing this for so long that it now has a deep archive of past positions, past jokes, past controversies that sometimes contradict its current stance. The man-bear-pig reversal is the most obvious example, but there are others. The show's treatment of transgender issues has evolved significantly over its run, with earlier episodes taking a much more dismissive approach than later ones. Its attitude toward marijuana has shifted as legalization progressed. Even its core libertarian philosophy, the idea that the truth is always somewhere in the middle and both sides are equally wrong, has been tested by events that demanded a more definitive position. What I find fascinating is that Parker and Stone don't try to pretend their earlier work doesn't exist. They don't retcon their past positions. They don't delete old episodes to avoid embarrassment. Well, except for the 5 banned episodes, but those were removed for safety reasons, not because Parker and Stone were embarrassed by them. The show's archive is a record of 2 people's evolving worldview over nearly 3 decades, with all the contradictions, mistakes, and growth that implies. I think that's something we should appreciate more. Most public figures in entertainment work hard to maintain a consistent brand. They craft an image and stick to it. Parker and Stone have never done that. They've been messy, contradictory, sometimes wrong, and always honest about their thought process. And the show is richer for it. There's a moment in the season 6 finale, Red Sleigh Down, which aired on December 11th, 2002, that I want to highlight because I think it captures something essential about South Park's emotional range. Kenny returns after being absent for the entire season, and the boys react with surprise and joy. It's a small moment, a few seconds of animation. But after a year of the show trying to function without one of its core 4 characters, Kenny's return carries genuine emotional weight. That's the thing about South Park that I think critics miss most often. Yes, it's crude. Yes, it's offensive. Yes, it pushed boundaries so far that people received death threats over it. But underneath all of that, there's a genuine love for these characters and this world. Parker and Stone care about Stan and Kyle and Cartman and Kenny. They care about Butters and Randy and Mr. Garrison and Chef. And when the show takes a moment to be sincere, when it drops the irony and the mockery and just lets its characters be human, those moments land harder than they would in almost any other show, because you don't expect them. The crudeness makes the sincerity hit harder. The offensive jokes make the tender moments more surprising. The constant irreverence makes the rare moments of reverence genuinely moving. South Park has always understood that contrast is the most powerful tool in storytelling. You can't have light without darkness. You can't have tenderness without crudeness. And you can't have genuine emotional depth without a foundation of absolute chaos. I think about the kid in Trey Parker's childhood who wore an orange parka and kept missing school. The kid who inspired Kenny. I wonder if that kid knows. I wonder if he's aware that his childhood habit of covering his face and his periodic absences from school became the basis for one of the most iconic characters in television history. I wonder if he's seen the show. I wonder what he thinks about the fact that his childhood friend turned their shared experiences in Colorado into a multi-billion-dollar empire built on construction paper and cursing. The thing about South Park's obscure facts is that they never stay obscure for long, because the show keeps creating new ones. Every season adds new layers, new production stories, new controversies, new moments where you pause the frame and see something in the background that nobody's noticed before. The show is almost 30 years old, and it's still hiding aliens in the corners. And honestly, I think that's the most obscure fact of all. Not any single production detail or behind-the-scenes story. The most obscure fact about South Park is how much depth is hiding behind a show that goes out of its way to look shallow. Every crude joke has a target. Every offensive moment has a purpose. Every background gag was placed there by someone who cared enough to include it, even when they knew most people would never notice. I've spent weeks researching this video. I've read interviews from 1997 that nobody has cited in over a decade. I've cross-referenced episode air dates with real-world events to understand why certain episodes were made when they were. I've watched production footage, listened to DVD commentaries, and dug through fan wikis that contain more detailed information about fictional characters than some people have about their own family members. And after all of that, I still feel like I've only scratched the surface. That's what South Park does to you. It pulls you in with the shock value, and then it rewards you for staying. The longer you look, the more you find. The deeper you go, the more layers reveal themselves. It's a show that's been playing a 27-year game of hide and seek with its audience, and the game isn't over. It might never be over. You know, there's a question I keep coming back to throughout all of this. Why does South Park work? Not why is it popular, not why has it lasted, but why does it actually work as art? Because it shouldn't. A show made in 6 days with simple animation and an absurdly small voice cast, created by 2 guys who show up to the Oscars in dresses while hallucinating, shouldn't be one of the most culturally significant television series ever produced. And yet here we are. I think the answer is that South Park works because it's honest. Not factually accurate, obviously. It plays fast and loose with reality all the time, but emotionally honest. Parker and Stone don't pretend to be wise, or balanced, or above it all. They get angry. They get petty. They get things wrong. They change their minds. They hold grudges. They have genuine affection for the things they mock, and genuine contempt for the things they celebrate. They're complicated, contradictory people making a complicated, contradictory show. And that contradiction is what makes it real. Every obscure fact I've shared tonight, from the guinea pigs and costumes, to the $74 theme song, to the $40 million restaurant renovation, tells the same story. 2 guys who genuinely cannot stop creating, who can't stop pushing, who can't stop looking at the world and saying, that's ridiculous, and here's why. They've been doing it for almost 30 years, and they're still finding new things to be ridiculous about. There's a frame in the pilot episode of South Park, the very first episode, where if you look carefully at the bus stop scene, you can see something standing behind the trees. It's small. It's gray. It has big oval eyes. And now, after everything we've talked about tonight, I think you understand why it matters. Because that little alien wasn't just an Easter egg. It was a promise that this show would always reward the people who looked a little closer, who stayed a little longer, who refused to take things at face value. And here we are, 27 seasons later, still looking, still finding new things, still amazed that a show made with construction paper cutouts by 2 guys from Colorado can be this deep, this funny, this endlessly fascinating. I want to say thank you, genuinely. If you've stayed with me through all of this, you're the kind of person this channel is for. Someone who cares about the details. Someone who wants to know the story behind the story. Someone who understands that the best things in life are always hiding something underneath the surface. If you enjoyed this, subscribe. Leave a comment telling me which South Park fact surprised you the most. Share this with someone who loves the show. Every little bit helps us keep making these deep dives for you. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.